Hello. Hi, everyone. How's it going? How you doing? How do people feel about user-activated soft forks? How many people know what a user-activated soft fork is? Okay, that's pretty good. I'm going to run over it anyway, just because it's such an essential part of what Bitcoin is. For me, nothing is more of a good representation of what Bitcoin is and how Bitcoin works than the fact that we have this mechanism within it by which we can upgrade things. So, in 2017, we wanted an upgrade. Well, before that, in 2016 was when we launched the activation, but we needed SegWit. It was a fix to an old bug called transaction malleability, and we went about it in a strange way. We went about it in a way where we did something called a miner-activated soft fork, which is where we say, there's a whole bunch of logic. We want to get it activated on the network, but we're going to make blocks modify. We're going to make miners modify the blocks they produce in such a fashion that if over a certain threshold is reached, this activation objectively happens on the network. And this is called a miner-activated soft fork, and it's great, and it's what we always end up doing. But there are different ways to do miner-activated soft forks. The way we initially approached it with SegWit was we said, here, we want SegWit active on the Bitcoin network. And here, miners, we're not going to do it because we're Bitcoin Core. We are writing software. This is not Ethereum, so we're not going to fucking just activate stuff on the network as the developers. Instead, we're going to do it in a way where we're not literally kind of in control of stuff. So we sort of pass the buck over to the miners, and the miners can activate or not, and therefore no one can accuse us of being in control by developers. But what happened is you put miners in an inappropriate position if you give them the option of saying no. So they did say no, and we couldn't activate SegWit, and at the last minute, a whole emergency thing emerged, which was what we call UASF today. It's not a strict user-activated soft fork, what we did to get SegWit activated. Instead, it was users forcing miners to actually activate an upgrade. So we're talking about activating and upgrading Bitcoin, but using a process where miners do it, so we all objectively agree the upgrade has happened. Fantastic. But we're not giving them the option of saying no anymore. And that's not out of malice. That's not out of hostility between different parts of the Bitcoin ecosystem. What it really just means is, hey, miners, can you upgrade this upgrade that we all want? Can you activate this upgrade that we all want? But we're not giving you the option to say no, because that's going to screw with your incentives. This is Bitcoin. In Bitcoin, you don't do anything else than assume people will do what they want to do when looking out for their own self-interest. You don't ever apply to altruism. You don't ever apply to people's good nature. You don't ever say please to anyone. What the user-activated soft fork movement did with SegWit was it said, activate SegWit, or your blocks are going to be rejected by the network, and you'll be making no money if you mine. That's how you get an upgrade activated on Bitcoin. And it worked, and it gave us SegWit, and it's a heroic movement, because if we hadn't done it, we wouldn't have SegWit, which means we wouldn't have Lightning, which means we wouldn't be able to get Taproot either. Bitcoin would not be where it is today without what this thing is. So I'm responsible for releasing a client, along with a couple of other people as well, the Taproot activation client. This was controversial in the space, and really why I'm doing this talk today is because I want to defend what's happened, and I want people to see it as an integral part of what goes on in Bitcoin. Because obviously Bitcoin's great, but it's not perfect, and we do have upgrades to do down the line. And upgrading Bitcoin is monumentally difficult, and we nearly tear ourselves apart every time we do it. And that's a feature, by the way, not a bug. If it was centralized and simple, then we could just have one guy at the top say, this is the new software, guys, boom, it's done. The point is Bitcoin doesn't work like that. So upgrading Bitcoin is not the easiest thing to do. So we all have to communicate together as a community and figure out how to do it. Taproot, fortunately, who knows the meme of unfairly cheap when describing Lightning transactions? So, all right, not so many people. Who's heard of Lightning? OK, cool. So Lightning transactions are unfairly cheap, they were referred to. Oh, no, that was the SegWit transactions, wasn't it? But SegWit allowed for Lightning. I digress. Anyway, what the fuck am I? Sorry about that, guys. So we've got a whole bunch of stuff we need to do. We've got upgrades coming down the line. It seems to me that the only process that ever seems to be able to get consensus within the development community is get all the code inside Bitcoin Core then ask the miners if they want to activate it. And we can't do anything more extreme than that, because then we get accused of it being a dev-activated soft fork. And that obviously introduces a dangerous element of centralization into Bitcoin. We don't really want it to be easy to change Bitcoin, because it works. And if there was an easy established process for changing Bitcoin, that would be an attack vector, and it could ultimately end up with malicious stuff going inside Bitcoin, and we don't want that. So user-activated soft fork is the answer, and really what I want to highlight with this talk, more than anything else, is how happy I am with Bitcoin at the moment. Because while you have a lot of hostility internally within the development community, things are working exactly as they should be. Because the devs release the upgrade, they release an option for the miners to activate it. So the devs are saying, not really our job to activate this, putting the miners in a situation where the miners are no longer just mining blocks, they also now have the decision. Let me tell you why that's not good in and of itself until the third part of this structure comes about. Just giving miners control over whether an upgrade happens or not just puts them in a totally inappropriate position. And that's what happened with SegWit. You had a guy saying, I don't want this upgrade because it screws up my secret advantage that I have. I'm not going to get into ASIC boost right here, but we really needed SegWit. It was a fix for a bug. It was what enabled the whole Lightning, it enabled Lightning to exist. And we had one guy basically saying, I'm not going to activate because it doesn't make sense for me to do it. And guess what? You gave me the option. I can say yes or no. So user-activated soft fork comes along and says, no, you can say yes now, or you can say yes at some point in the future, but that's it. That's all the time we're giving you. If you still continue not saying yes after that, your blocks are useless, and you're mining nothing. You're wasting electricity. That's what UASF does. What it does is it takes the miners out of this inappropriate position. Miners don't need, or it's not ever appropriate for you to ask the miners, right? Let's talk about Taproot. Right now we're in a situation with Taproot. It's an upgrade everyone wants, which is miraculous to me, and it shows that Bitcoin's still a niche thing, because if Bitcoin was mainstream, Taproot would be a controversial upgrade. It provides privacy. It provides scaling. It's a miracle to me that this thing has flown under the radar and basically everyone's fine with it happening. But here we go. Taproot's on the way. We asked the miners if they'd like to activate it for us. Miraculously, they've all basically said yes. And in about 6 or 7 days, I think it is, we're going to have Taproot get locked in, and then it will become active. Yeah. And I'd really like to shout out Alejandro. He did a talk. No, he was going to do a talk here earlier. I think he decided not to do it. But he's one of the operators of a mining pool, and he coordinated the whole effort between miners. And that's why we're going to basically see Taproot. But I'd just like to highlight that this mechanism of user-activated soft forks remains, and it's essential. Because if right now we have an upgrade that thousands of people want, maybe millions of people want in Bitcoin, that is in the hands of maybe 20 people that run mining pools, and at any one point, any of them can go, that's it, leave us off, no more Taproot. And then we have to think of something else, except I'd like to go back to my point of why I'm so happy with what's going on in Bitcoin at the moment, because the problem's been solved before it even started. I released, along with an old, brilliant core dev, Luke Jr., and Shinobi might be in here, we released a client that basically says, yes, we're still doing exactly what you're doing, but by November 2022, if you're still saying no to Taproot, your blocks will start being rejected, at least by our nodes. And what would happen is everyone would start running the nodes that are based on our client if we were to head for that situation. The fact that it exists out there on the Bitcoin network live right now, along with the non-committal client that gives the miners the option, the fact that those two things exist together mean miners are more incentivized to not cause disruption and basically just allow things to progress in the way that we all really want them to progress. So looks like we're going to get Taproot, but my main motivation for doing this talk is not so much Taproot, it's to counter some of the whitewashing that's occurred regarding 2017. 2017 was obviously the happiest year in Bitcoin for so many price-wise until the last few months. But what happened was Bitcoin came close to disaster over and over again. And we were under attack from every single part of we had every exchange. We had Coinbase trying to destroy us. We had BitPay. And a lot of this has been forgotten because I see these people all over the place at this festival. And these people were pure adversaries to Bitcoin. And they were pushing for big blocks. And if they were going to let us have SegWit, they were going to force us to do it as a hard fork, not a soft fork. And it looks like everyone already understands the difference in this audience anyway. And in the end, we won that battle, and it was because of UASF. But UASF was just championed by plebs like me. So what that means is there isn't really much glory in it. You just have to dig into Bitcoin's history and find out what happened. There isn't really any celebration of it, and there was certainly very little by way of apology by all of the companies that tried to kill the golden cow, if the golden goose, perhaps. Yeah, there's been none of that. And Brian Armstrong, all of these, Vitalik Buterin, I mean, not that he's a Bitcoiner, but there was just so much attack and people trying to prevent us from doing the upgrade, at least in the manner that we needed it to be done. And a bunch of unknown people and anonymous avatars on Twitter got together, threw together this client, people started running it, and it was David versus Goliath, and David won, but that's Bitcoin. David always wins versus Goliath in Bitcoin. And the main way we do that with regard specifically to upgrades is this UASF mechanism. And I think I have 15 minutes to talk. I'm not sure how well I've explained it, so I think I'm only about 10 minutes in. I'd love to take a few questions if anyone is curious about this. So please, there's a mic over there. Anyone got any questions? Yeah, go for it.
How do you think about future upgrades going forward now that the Taproot activation was pretty smooth?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think what we've been doing is we don't want to set too much of a precedent because, like I said, it is an attack vector. If there's like an established mechanism for upgrading Bitcoin, then you never know. You could have these Marathon, who are, by the way, talking on the main stage, going like pushing these OFAC compliant blocks on us that we really don't want. And they could do some sort of malicious soft fork where they say, okay, we're going to start, this is a soft fork is just adding a new rule into the Bitcoin code base, right? So it's old nodes and existing nodes are fine with it because you're not breaking any of the existing rules. So if someone was to come along and do that, it would be a disaster. But when it comes to things like Taproot, and hopefully the next upgrade will be any prevout, which helps with scaling the Lightning Network, when it comes to that, I think if it's obvious and clear that there's consensus around it, what I expect is exactly the same situation. I would like it to not be to be faced with hostility when someone like me comes along and releases a forcing client, because in reality it just helps. You have Bitcoin Core release a non-forcing client that says, okay, miners, please activate any prevout. And then you have a grassroots initiative come along that says, yeah, miners, by the way, you also don't have the option of saying no, really, because something already exists in the wild that people will adopt if you decide to, for your own reason, not give us this upgrade that we really want. Anyone else?
Hello. Yeah, as far as like the political balance between miners and users slash nodes and the devs that like kind of can maintain the repo or whatever, how do you think that drive chains and BIP 300 could adjust or maybe improve that balance?
I'm not sure. I haven't thought about it, and I don't really want to speak about it because my understanding's not good enough. Sorry about that. Anyone else got any questions? Yeah, please.
Can you speak to the possibility of a Sybil attack on the signaling so someone could make it look
I can't hear you at all, I'm afraid. I could hear you more if you just spoke like away from the mic, probably.
Can you speak to a Sybil attack that could make UASF look like a minority rather than a majority if it came down to the line?
Well, a UASF is sort of designed to work well as a minority in the first place because of wipeout risk and only existing for one side. Like I was explaining, a soft fork that's regardless of a Sybil attack, because a soft fork is adding a rule into Bitcoin so it doesn't break anything and everything can continue as normal. The opposite of a hard fork, right, where you need everyone to come with you or you just splinter off and become Bitcoin Cash or Bitcoin SV or whatever. Like, the advantage with a soft fork is you're adding a new rule, so you're adding a new rule that people must comply to in order to lengthen your fork of the chain. But because you're not breaking rules of the chain that exists, ignoring your thing, and Bitcoin nodes by default accept the longest chain, what happens is our soft fork chain that says we're rejecting miners that aren't mining with Taproot activated blocks, Taproot signaling blocks. Okay, we got one block in the last 2 weeks. They've gone on another 2,000 blocks. We've got another block. They're 4,000 blocks ahead of us. We ignore their chain because we got a new rule that they're not adhering to, but we're not breaking their rules, right? So eventually, as we slowly accrue hash rate, and eventually as we get enough power, once we get longer than the incumbent chain, it gets removed because it's no longer the longest chain. And that means all of the miners that mined on the chain ignoring the UASF have all of their block rewards evaporate. So what that means is, even if the 1% of users and 1% of miners are mining on the UASF chain, the UASF chain can carry on forever knowing it will never get wiped out because it's got a tighter rule set. The other chain has to exist in fear permanently that if the UASF chain ever gets long enough, it will wipe out the incumbent chain. So that's how 1,000 of us roughly, and I don't want to kid anyone, maybe 500 of those were spun up by one guy as an Amazon Web Service or whatever. That was how 500 of us took down the giant mining pools that were denying us SegWit. So that's a mechanism we always have. It can be used maliciously if we're not careful, but the Sybil attack is not a concern in that regard. You have a situation where the small guy can beat the big guy, and the big guy will never be able to fight back in the same manner. Yeah, great.
There was recent discussion on the mailing list about BIP editors.
We done?
We have to wrap it up. We really do.
Yeah, no problem.
Expanding the BIP editor that process.
Um,
There was discussion on the mailing list
about BIP editing?
and adding more people that have the ability to maintain the BIP.
That's just, yeah, I know, that's just a clerical role within Bitcoin. Like, yeah, people are a bit annoyed with Lou Jr., so they've asked him to resign. He's not going to. I don't see any reason for him to. It's super just a clerical role. It's the equivalent of a librarian taking a book and putting it in order. Like, it's so far removed from what people are running as code and stuff. It doesn't particularly concern me. Thanks so much for coming, guys. My name's Bitcoin Mechanic. I'm at Grassfed Bitcoin on Twitter, Grassfed. If you want to connect, please do. I'm here to teach people about Bitcoin. I love doing it. It's a passion. Thanks so much.